In today's episode, I'm joined by Greg Hay, and we're talking all things forestry. Greg's a true industry vet with over 47 years of forestry experience. He shares insights on everything from forestry market trends to sustainable forestry practices. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Let's dive in.
In Our Expert Opinion podcast is brought to you by SVN Saunders Real Estate, a full-service land and commercial brokerage with over $4 billion in transactions since 1996.
Greetings and welcome back to another edition of In Our Expert Opinion podcast. I'm excited about our conversation today. Today's guest is a man by the name of Greg Hay. If you've been around the forestry industry in the Southeast for any amount of time, this man really needs no introduction. You probably already know who he is. But he has been in the forestry industry his entire career. He is the newly elected president of the AFA, Arkansas Forestry Association. And he actually is joining our team at Saunders come January as a land advisor, which I am thrilled about. He's going to bring a ton to the team. But Greg, we are so excited to have you on the podcast today. Thanks again for coming on. Let's kick things off. What did I miss? Tell us a little bit more about you.
Sure. First off, thanks for having me, David. I sure appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today.
Of course.
I grew up in New Jersey, of all places, back when it was truly the Garden State. We had, in my rural town, farmers that were row crop farmers of cabbage, potatoes. We had a lot of fruit orchards back then. We also grew a lot of silage for the dairy farms in the area. That included corn, alfalfa, clover, etc. So it was a very rural community. I was very active in my Boy Scout troop, earned the rank of Eagle, graduated from Princeton High School. We were too small a community to have a high school of our own, so we got bused over to Princeton, and we were known as the farmers. They were the townies. So it was the farmers against the townies at Princeton High School for us. And during my high school years, I worked at a local dairy, a very large dairy, putting milking machines on cows. And after 2 years of doing that, I was pretty convinced I could go to college after all. I wasn't planning on going to college, but milking cows, it broke me. It broke me. So I started off college by enrolling in Paul Smith College in Upper New York State. It had a forestry curriculum for pre-professional foresters. With temperatures dropping below 40 degrees, below zero, and logging white pine with horses in the snow during forestry labs. After a year, I opted for a warmer climate, transferred to Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches, Texas, located in the piney woods.
Cannot blame you for that.
Yeah. So I got introduced to chiggers and working in the wood basket of the South.
I bet that was a pleasant surprise. You thought you were seeking warmer weather and you found chiggers.
Oh yeah.
Well, good stuff, man. Well, let's dig a little deeper into your professional journey. How'd you get started in forestry, and what was it that drew you to the field? You came from New York to Texas, and then ended up in Arkansas. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, after graduating from Stephen F. Austin in Nacogdoches, Texas, I was offered a job with Weyerhaeuser Company in Mountain Pine, Arkansas, when they still had a sawmill there. So I started out my career in their logging and inventory departments there at Mountain Pine. And after about a year with Weyerhaeuser Company, I was offered a professional position with the U.S. Forest Service, working as a reforestation forester up on the Ouachita National Forest at Danville, Arkansas.
Okay.
And from there, I moved to Perryville, Arkansas, went back to Clemson, Mississippi State, and West Virginia universities in a graded curricula to attain a certified silviculturist credential with the U.S. Forest Service. Served about 10 years with the U.S. Forest Service as a silviculturist, and then used my silvicultural background, believe it or not, to transition into sales. Most foresters don't transition into sales. We're known as introverts and very conservative. We don't mind talking to trees, but talking to people, that's something different now.
Talking to trees. Well, hey, as I'm thinking about that, that had to be a very valuable skill that you already had the technical expertise. And if you can pair that up with some sales skills, that had to be a pretty powerful thing.
It was that allowed me to be successful is the way I think about it. Having that domain knowledge as a silviculturist, and I transitioned into sales selling herbicides of all things. Uh, and the herbicide company I worked for was a distributor, so we were representing all the major manufacturers: Dow, DuPont, Monsanto, American Cyanamid, BASF. So I wasn't pushing or hard selling any one particular product. I had all those tools in my toolbox. When I was working with landowners, I could recommend the very best tank mix, the very best products, and the rates to apply to their land to meet their objectives. And that silviculture background really made it a success for me. And after about 14 years with that company, I was actually evolved into being a director of the company, managing a 4-state territory with 7 salespeople underneath me and 2 warehouse managers. And it really was a learning experience for me, having to manage people now, as well as learn the sales skill set that I had to learn in order to be successful. But
Yeah.
after 14 years with them, Midwest-Vaco lured me to South Carolina. And it was a venture capital uh, division of Midwest-Vaco. And as director of sales, I was responsible for promoting a web-based GIS platform sold on a subscription basis, and high-end consulting services like harvest scheduling, forest planning, wood basket analysis, that type of work. But
Yeah.
being a venture capital company, it folded in about 2 years. And God was good to me, got me back to Arkansas uh, through a Canadian company selling cloned loblolly pine trees.
Wow.
So I got to use my silvicultural experience once again, as well as my skill set to market and promote advanced genetics by selling cloned loblolly pine trees. Being a venture capital company, though, and with clones being somewhat new to forestry, and kind of at the high end of the cost, as well as being at the high end of the genetic ladder, that company folded after about 8 years. And I went back into selling herbicides for another 8 years before joining ArborGen to promote advanced genetics and be a reforestation advisor, advising clients on what best genetics to meet their objectives on their lands.
Okay.
That's kind of the history of Greg Hay, 47 years experience in the Arklatex region.
47 years. That's a man. You've probably seen a lot in your day. That's the thing about, as you were talking about those venture capital backed, sounds like startups that you worked for. It's tough with those because the ceiling can be very high, but the floor can be very low. It sounds like you experienced that in a way.
Indeed, I did. Indeed, I did.
So Greg, forestry is rather large here in Arkansas. Can you walk us through just how big it is and the kind of economic impacts that it has, both from a state level, but also from a local level with the rural communities here in the state?
Well, Arkansas, believe it or not, is nationally ranked number 6 in forestry products, valued at over 6.4 billion. Uh, it represents about 4.1% of the state's GDP, comprised of those contributions by the forest industry, making Arkansas's economy the most forestry dependent of the southern states.
Hmm.
And when you look at other southern states like Georgia, you would think that maybe they are a little bit higher in their dependency for forestry. But Arkansas economy today is the most forestry dependent of the southern states. More than 56% of our state is forested. We've got about 19 million acres of forest land with over 12 billion trees. And of that 19 million acres, 11 million of it approximately is owned by non-industrial forest landowners, which is incredible. And we have 2 national forests as well: the Ozark National Forest, comprising about 1.8 million, and the Ozark St. Francis of about 1.2 million acres. So it's an incredible economy that's dependent on our forestry practices and industry in Arkansas. Locally, how that impacts us locally, when you look at National Forest Service, the National Forest Service sale receipts, those a portion of them go to the individual counties in which that forest product was taken off the land. So if some of that land is harvested, that return, a portion of that goes to the schools and roads in that particular county.
So you touched on this a second ago when you mentioned Georgia, but most of our listeners are probably going to be a little bit more familiar with forests in places like Florida and Georgia. What would you say makes Arkansas forestry unique compared to, some of these other southeastern states?
Well, there are some unique aspects of Arkansas forestry, in addition to just the financial returns and making Arkansas number 6 and independent greater on forestry than the other southern states. In Arkansas, as opposed to the eastern seaboard, predominantly here we've got 2 species of pine that we deal with: the shortleaf pine in northern part of the state, in the western part of the state, and loblolly pine in the south part of the state. We're landlocked, so we don't have any coastline that we're involved with. We don't have the variety of species of pine that they might have over in Florida, for instance. We don't have the longleaf. We don't have the slash. So we don't have sand pine. We don't have any of that over here in Arkansas. It's just shortleaf pine and loblolly pine. One of the unique things about our region over here, we don't have a lower coastal plain. We're upper coastal plain and Piedmont region if you look at the Ozark and the Ouachitas. And one piece of trivia that's kind of neat, there are only 2 east-west oriented mountain ranges in the United States, North America. East of the Mississippi, it's the Allegheny Mountain Range in Pennsylvania. West of the Mississippi, it's the Ouachita Mountains here in Arkansas. And in Arkansas, when you fly over those mountain ranges, you'll see that the northern slopes are in hardwood and the southern slopes, those slopes facing south, are predominantly in pine. So that really separates us a little bit from those states to the east of us.
Yeah. Is there a reason why there's a distinction between the hardwoods in the north and the pine in the south part of the state?
That's a real good question, David. It's predominantly due to the moisture content on those northern slopes that you have versus the hot and dry condition that you have on those slopes that are facing to the south or to the west. Those slopes facing to the south and west are going to be drier because you've got greater sun exposure.
Huh.
And those slopes to the north and east, they don't have as great a sun exposure, so your soil temperatures are lower and your soil moisture is higher.
There you go. It's as simple as that. You can overthink these things, but sometimes it's just physics,
It really is. It really is.
Well, Greg, I'd love to get into some of the sustainable forestry practices for a moment. What are some of the common reforestation practices that are used in Arkansas to support sustainable forestry? I know that we talk about sustainability. It can become a buzzword. We throw it around all the time and it's pretty broad, but specifically as it relates to the common reforestation practices here in the state. Would love to hear you talk about that a bit.
You bet. Here in Arkansas, our forestry practices in terms of sustainability, and I define sustainability when it comes to forestry as a professional management of our forests. The forests are managed professionally. They're going to be sustainable and resilient. Some of the practices that we have here in Arkansas in terms of reforestation, there's natural regeneration, where you have trees that are out there producing cones and seed that naturally regenerate in the forest floor, both shortleaf and loblolly. Shortleaf requires really bare soil to germinate that seed. So you got to have some soil scarification coming on the site through logging that might cause some scarification, or burning that would cause some mineral soil exposure to help the shortleaf pine generate. And you've only got a good crop of shortleaf pine cones maybe every 7 years.
Hmm.
With the older companies like Georgia Pacific, Potlatch, Deltic, uh, those companies were predominantly natural regeneration for a very long time. And as the years came by and that land ownership changed hands, they transitioned from natural regeneration to artificial regeneration, planting pine trees.
Hmm.
And in the north, where you've got shortleaf pine is natural, the the national forests are basically required to put back what they take off. So if they take off shortleaf pine, they're required to put shortleaf pine back. And in the south part of the state, it's predominantly south and central, it's predominantly loblolly. The practices that we use include site preparation, and that might be chemical site preparation with herbicides. It might include in the north, where you've got the rocky hills of the Ozarks and the Ouachitas, ripping, where we have dozers, D8 dozers with two rear-mounted steel shanks, 45 inches in length, ripping to an average depth of about 18 inches. That allows us to place the roots in the moisture-retaining clay horizons. Uh, in addition to that, in the south, where we've got poorly drained sites, it might include bedding. Uh, so we've got ripping and bedding as mechanical site preparation treatments in addition to the chemical site preparation treatments that occur. Burning is another practice that's often used for both site preparation where planter access is needed, for wildlife habitat improvement and fuel reduction. That's another great tool that we have. Herbaceous weed control is pretty much a standard operating procedure where we're planting now. And that is a term used to represent the removal or control of weeds and grasses out there after we plant. Weeds and grasses take up a lot of water and nutrients for those pines that we've planted or the hardwoods that we've planted. And grasses compete more than broadleaf annuals. So we really want to control that grass. And it was often thought in years past, decades past, that, foresters thought, well, weeds and grasses aren't going to hurt my pines. I need to control the hardwood competition out there, or the weed competition out there in terms of species that we don't want, undesirable species. But they didn't think that weeds and grasses were something that they needed to bother with. After the introduction of herbaceous weed control, it didn't take long for foresters to realize, wow, what a benefit. They saw their pines really pop up out of that grass and weeds. It was like they were fertilized. Hmm. So herbaceous weed control is another aspect of that we use for our forestry practices that is common here in Arkansas. And I can't say enough about how it's so important. We've got one chance to get it right when we're planting. So it's real important that we not only look at the site preparation and making sure that it's right and the herbaceous weed control, but also the genetics that we're applying to that land. So in getting it right and doing it right the first time round, I mean, you don't want to plant something and find out 14 years later you made a wrong decision. And it's kind of like Maximus in the movie Gladiator. He's in front of his troops and he says to them, what we do in life echoes in eternity.
Yeah.
Well, what we do at Stand Establishment, we're going to have to live with for 25 years. So it's prudent upon us to get it right from the get-go. So in addition to the practices of site preparation, herbaceous weed control, the burning that we use, and the genetics that we apply, we also look at the proper stocking and the proper spacing for the objective that we want, whether it's pulpwood or whether it's chip and saw or whether it's saw timber. And in addition to that, we look at how we're going to plant those trees. Is it going to be planted by hand or is it going to be planted by machine? A lot of aspects go into the practices that we use today in forestry to get the stands that we're looking for and optimize our investment.
You mentioned, you hit on this very briefly, but I want to dive in a little bit because I'm a very passionate hunter. In terms of uh, wildlife habitat and as it relates to these prescribed burns, um, admittedly, I've never gotten very into turkey hunting, mainly because pretty much my whole life the turkey population has been seemingly pretty poor. But I've heard a lot about this recently, and I'd love to kind of hear you briefly talk about the impacts that prescribed burns on have on the rise in turkey population. I hear my parents' generation talk about when they were growing up, there were turkeys everywhere, and now there's just not, which is probably why I never really got that into it. But it seems like they might be coming back, and I'd love to hear how hear you talk a little bit about that as it relates to the prescribed burns.
Absolutely. And I'm going to backtrack here just a little bit. One of the practices that is very predominant throughout Arkansas is the voluntary adherence to best management practices, often referred to as BMPs. Mm-hmm. This includes things like proper logging so that we're not rutting up the soil. It includes streamside management zones to protect water quality. It includes things that promote proper wildlife habitat improvement. So let's get into that turkey issue that you were talking about. One of the aspects of to help our habitat for turkey is two things. One, edge effect from cutting, whether that's a harvest area where we're rotating the trees off that land, and or whether it's a thinning practice where we're opening up and making certain that we continue to have the vigorous, healthy, resilient stand that we want out there. When we're doing harvest rotations and when we're doing thinnings, we open up the forest floor to more sunlight. When you have more sunlight, we're producing more forbs and legumes. And those forbs and legumes, those plants, are going to increase your insect population. And that's going to help your turkey situation. For burning will also proliferate that ground vegetation that you see coming up, the weeds and grasses. That seed bank that's in that soil, when it's exposed through a burn, then you allow it to germinate and come up. So you've got to have that burn that helps remove that duff layer that allows better germination, and most importantly, the sunlight on the forest floor. And over the years, it was thought, well, burning is bad. You know, we had Smokey the Bear out there, trying to keep us from burning off the forest. But burning is really a tool that we use in forestry to promote wildlife habitat. We do those wildlife habitat burns on large acreages during the winter before the nesting season, so that we do not harm the turkeys through their nesting season, but create that opening and that forest floor vegetation that we're looking for to increase the insect population, helping the turkeys.
Maybe I'm oversimplifying this a bit, but forest fires have a very clear negative stigma. When Smokey the Bear came about, did that program backfire in a way? Because I know that prescribed burning, it carried a stigma along with it, and a lot of landowners just stopped doing it, right?
That's true. That's true. I think you're very accurate in that assessment, David, that Smokey the Bear, only you can prevent forest fires, help reduce the number of fires out there, and prescribed burning got a negative connotation too when prescribed burns got out of control. And they caused large acreages to be burned. And here in Arkansas, we now have a certified burning legislation that helps reduce the liability of those folks that are doing prescribed burns, particularly your timber investment management organizations and your industry land ownerships like Potlatch Delta, Green Bay Packaging, Weyerhaeuser, and others. It allows them to burn and not be held liable for fires that get off of their land, provided that they've prepared a prescribed burning plan and are prescribed burners through the certified burning program that we have in the state now. In that certified burner program has schools that teach how to develop prescribed burning plan and how to go about burning, whether it's head fires or stripping, backfires. It teaches you fire behavior, and it allows an individual to go out there and burn tracts of land that he can do it professionally and without the degree of risk that you would have for somebody that's not trained.
Yeah. Very interesting. So we have quite a few conservation programs in the state. Can you talk a little bit about some of the big ones? We don't have to go into crazy detail, but what do they do? What are they? And two, what are some of their main goals and objectives?
It's a good question. There are various cost share programs out here today offered by the government that will pay a portion of the cost of eligible conservation practices, and those include forestry practices as well as agricultural practices. One of them is the Forest Stewardship Program, and there's a lot of acronyms out here, David.
Yeah.
Forest Stewardship Program is FSP, and it provides assistance to forest landowners for practices that will enhance or sustain healthy forest, and it also provides some cost share assistance with regard to developing a forest management plan. The Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, another acronym, is run by the Farm Service Agency, and that provides cost share dollars to farmers having a crop history on their land to provide incentive to put a portion of their land into conservation cover that could include grasses and that forbs and legumes that would enhance the wildlife habitat. It could also include forest cover, but it allows them to get some cost share to put some portion of their land into conservation cover. A couple of other programs are the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, EQIP, and that's run by the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, and it provides cost sharing for practices like planting, site preparation, burning, thinning, etc. And in addition to that program, there's the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP. It provides technical and financial assistance to forest landowners to enhance their existing work. So they've already made some effort in conservation efforts, whether it's forestry or agriculture, and the CSP program provides additional cost sharing for their existing efforts that they've already started. And that can range from $1,500 to $4,000 in 2024. These available practices vary from state to state with the Conservation Stewardship Program. And these programs can offset the cost of forestry practices pretty significantly. The best way to get started to take advantage of those cost share programs is by visiting the local NRCS office to discuss your plans, complete an application first and foremost to determine your eligibility. The NRCS will then rank your application based according to their local resource concerns. And if you're selected, you can choose whether or not you want to sign a contract to get that work done. And it's important to realize that cost share is just a portion of the practice cost that you may incur. And if you're contracting a vendor to perform that specific activity, whether it be tree planting, thinning, etc., you're responsible for paying that contractor prior to getting reimbursed a portion of that cost from the NRCS.
Okay.
And the NRCS controls the purse strings for both CSP and for EQIP. There have been other programs in the past that have had sunsets to them, so they've come and they've gone. But the two biggest ones for forestry today are the EQIP and CSP.
Okay. And you mentioned they vary state to state. I'm curious if these programs are primarily funded at the state or federal level, and the ones at the federal level, if there's going to be any potential impacts to how they're going to operate going forward with our new presidential regime coming in. And I think I know that's kind of one of the first things on the docket is some of these federally funded government agencies may or may not look the same here in a couple months. So, um,
Well, first and foremost, the cost share programs are federally funded. And a lot of these programs are tied to the Farm Bill,
yep.
which we don't currently have uh, approved yet by the Congress. So it's important to contact your senators and your congressmen, asking them to support the current Farm Bill to get some of these programs funded. And the Farm Bill then appropriates funds to the states, and it's allocated state to state to state based on a number of things. It might be based on the state's history of using those funds,
Okay.
and using a large percentage of those funds. After the states receive their funding from the federal government, they in turn allocate those funds that they get on a proportional basis to the counties. And you may have some counties in the state that really, they have a land base that really wouldn't qualify for the cost share programs, but other counties do. And they have a history of using a percentage of the funds that are allocated to them. And that's where the states tend to take a look at, well, what's the past history of these counties in terms of using a higher percentage of the funds that we allocate to them, because they don't want to turn back funds. It's use it or lose it. So they want to definitely use it and get those funds to the people that can utilize it and do something with their property that's going to be beneficial in their forestry objectives. So that's kind of how it works in a nutshell, very briefly, without getting into the mechanics and the costs for different activities, different practices, because those costs vary from year to year. But because they vary from year to year, and because the programs are a little bit different, you really need to visit with your NRCS office to determine your eligibility. And it's really incredibly important to be working with a consulting forester that's familiar with those programs, and it can help guide you to those programs that are going to get you the most bang for your buck.
Got it. Well, luckily we live in a democracy, and the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So if this is important to you, which it's important to us, and probably most people that are listening to this.
And you mentioned a little bit about, David, about how they've impacted Arkansas forestry. They have enabled landowners to reforest harvested areas more affordably and complete practices to ensure their stands are healthy and resilient. Many acres of the Delta land over in the Mississippi River area, they have been afforested with hardwood species. So that's a real big improvement there. One negative impact of some of these programs in the past has been overstocking of the pines. Some of the stocking requirements of these cost share programs have been pretty heavy. So we've got a lot of overstocked pine stands from past practices that are now 20 years old. And now we've got stands that we're having a hard time finding markets for the pulpwood that are on those stands. So it's, today the cost share programs have reduced some of their stocking requirements so that they're not requiring so many trees per acre, but they're requiring fewer trees per acre. But for advanced genetics, in my opinion, they're still too high stocking requirements. But I advise landowners, ask for an exception. Never hurts to ask for an exception. Explain why you're asking for the exception, that you're going to reforest with genetically improved stock, and you can seek out some documentation to support going with a wider spacing and fewer trees per acre when you're planting that advanced genetics. We've learned over the last 20 years, you don't want to plant advanced genetics at conventional stocking rates.
You never know if you can ask, and you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So why not, right? That's good.
That's right.
That's good advice. Well, I'd like to switch gears a little bit and touch on the timberland investment opportunities in our state. So for someone thinking about maybe buying timberland here in Arkansas, what would you say are some of the things that make it a compelling investment opportunity?
Well, I think first it provides a competitive real return versus traditional asset classes. Strictly from an investment perspective, timberland has returned on average about 6.5% return annually over the last 100 years. And experts say that it's going to provide, they anticipate maybe a 4.8% return over the next 7 years or so. And keep in mind, this is better than double the return generated by large cap U.S. stocks.
Yeah.
But beyond timberland income, there are many forest landowners that lease their land for hunting, so they've got that income stream going. There are other potential income streams as well. I mean, people invest in timberland for reasons beyond the timber resource: hunting, recreation, aesthetic and legacy stewardship with their families. It certainly provides portfolio diversification and risk management. Those risks include things like biological, physical, political. You've got a lot of risks involved, so it can provide some portfolio diversification there. Provides for capital preservation via a biological growth asset. It's a hedge against inflation. It provides some tax benefits with subsidized credits and long-term flexibility. So I think there are a lot of different reasons for people to take a look at forest land as an investment. You've also got new products like biochar, transparent wood, sustainable aviation biofuel, wood insulation and textiles. You've got new markets like cross-laminated timber, which is big up there in the Fayetteville area with Walmart. You've got carbon credits and renewable energy. New technologies include genetics and nanotechnology energy for batteries. So there's a lot of different reasons to take a look at timberland as an investment. And here in Arkansas, I still feel like we're an undiscovered state when it comes to our resources and our beauty in the state. And we've got a lot of folks that are recognizing that now, not only from our forest land, but our lakes and our rivers. It's truly a beautiful area, and our land base is really underappreciated. So I think forestry and forest land is an excellent investment when you're looking at increasing your portfolio and diversifying your portfolio allocation.
Yeah. I don't want to get too political here, because I know this can be a polarizing topic, but eventually in this conversation, we're going to talk about carbon credits, but I don't want to get to that quite just yet. However, the carbon credits craze, if you will, a lot of that stems from the global warming and all this kind of stuff, which I'm sitting here listening to all these great things about timber investments, and there are a lot of them, but potential risks and downsides. Something I've just thought about really is, as you know, if the earth is warming again, I don't want us, we don't need to go down that road, but let's just say that it is, and if there are more, severe weather events and tornadoes, I mean, things like severe weather events and how that relates to the risks associated with your investment, is that even big enough to be a notable risk, or something that you've seen, or how does that work?
It is a noticeable risk, and particularly in Florida, Georgia areas along the coast there, where you've had hurricanes, and we've got a disaster relief legislation posed and presented to the Congress. It's a Disaster Recovery Act. I know that the Forest Landowners Association, as well as other state forestry associations, have promoted and lobbied for it extensively. Our senators, Senator Cotton and Senator Bozeman, have co-sponsored that, along with our only forester in Congress, Bruce Westerman. And that's going to provide some real help to landowners that have experienced the devastation of a hurricane or a tornado. Currently, the agricultural farmers, they have crop insurance to help them out. Forest landowners don't have that insurance.
I was going to ask about that.
So all we're asking for is a little help. We're not asking for, a handout when it comes to being truly equitable with farmers, but we want some of that risk mitigation when it comes to these disasters of tornadoes and hurricanes that cannot be controlled by the landowner whatsoever. We just want some of that risk assurance through some kind of an insurance and disaster recovery act is one way to go about that. So we're promoting that very hard and trying to get that passed. And with the new Congress, I think we've got a lot better chance of getting that done.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating, and I'm excited to see what comes of that, because I agree. It seems like that should definitely be a thing if this is the direction that we're heading. But we could probably do a whole podcast on that even, but we won't. So let's move on. For prospective buyers who might be interested in acquiring forested land in Arkansas, but really anywhere, if you're listening to this, anywhere you are, what are some of the practical considerations or advice that you would give to someone before they dived in?
Well, for those interested in forest land, first, they need to objectively clarify why they're purchasing forest land. Why are they really doing it? What's driving them to purchase that land? Is it timber production? Is it hunting? Is it wildlife recreation, a scenic view shed, or all of the above? And often it's all of the above. It's not just one thing, but there are folks that are just investing in forest land for timber. And if you're just looking at the timber resource alone, as well as some of those other resources, hunting, recreation, etc. But for timber, first and foremost, you want to determine what kind of inventory exists out there. What's the age of that timber? What percentage of it is in saw timber or chip and saw or pulpwood? And if the timber is a pine plantation, can the seller provide what genetic family was planted out there? That age of the plantation, the spacing, and the stocking rate are all going to come into play. If they've used advanced genetics, the appraisers that appraise that land will want to know that, because often they will use an expressed age to value that property that has advanced genetics on it versus actual age. So you might have a 5-year-old loblolly stand there, but it will be treated by an appraiser as an 8-year-old stand with greater volume on it. So it's important to know that kind of information as well. The productivity of the land. Forest land is generally, its productivity is measured with site index. It's a term called site index, and that's a measure of the land's productivity in terms of the height of the trees that are out there. For natural stands, it's usually a base age of 50, the height at age 50. For plantations, it's usually the height of those trees at age 25. Neighboring property ownership, you want to consider that. Is there neighboring property ownership that might be available to you to expand your ownership in years to come? Are there any adverse property ownership issues that you want to worry about? Access is absolutely critical.
Yep.
That's another aspect that you want to look at. If you've got good access, good highway frontage, good roads from the highway frontage into that property that don't have any easements or rights of way, but you've got excellent access, that's a big aspect of looking at that forest land in terms of whether or not you want to purchase it and how much you want to pay for that land.
What about proximity to a mill? Is that not as big of an issue in Arkansas, just given the sheer size of our industry? Is there enough to where that's not as much of a factor?
No, that's an excellent question, David. Looking at timberland, and there are a lot of reduction in pulpwood mills that have occurred over the last 13, 15 years, but there's a lot of capital being invested in the sawmills that are producing saw timber, solid wood products. But knowing where those mills are in proximity to your land to be able to get you a better price, a better market for your land. Same thing with the product that you want to produce. Do you want to produce saw timber, or do you want to produce poles? Poles generally have a higher stumpage price than saw timber, but if your pole mill is 150 miles away, you may not get as much as if you're 50 miles away from that pole mill.
Yep.
So that's an incredibly important question. Great question. And that mill location and proximity to that piece of land that you're looking at is critical.
Yep. You came here for the forestry advice, and you might have left as an intelligent investor. Who knows? That's free advice right there, people. All right. So for the folks out there who already own land but don't currently have any timber on it, but maybe they want to get started. What are their options? What kind of programs are offered that are available to help them get started?
That's an excellent question. When I talk to landowners, private landowners, about starting a forest, they often relate a number of concerns. Three of the most common are that they're overwhelmed by the entire reforestation process. It's their first time. They don't know where to begin. They're confused by the number of genetic choices that they have in front of them, not sure which to pick based on what they can afford and what their objectives are. They're frustrated with the current timber prices, stumpage prices. They want the best ROI they can get. And when I ask them, well, do any of these three concerns resonate with you? If they pick one of those concerns, then I can delve into that in specifics. But those are the three biggest concerns I run into when I talk to landowners that have not reforested their land or haven't got a forest in place presently. And the best way to start is to find a consulting forester that you trust. That consulting forester will help guide you through the entire process in a professional manner and provide you with peace of mind. And a lot of folks take a look at a consulting forester as a cost. What's going to cost me if I sign an agreement with that consulting forester? What they don't realize is that consulting forester is going to save them money and make them money.
Yep.
It's like building a house. If you go out and buy a piece of land and you're going to build a house and you're going to be the general contractor for one house, how much leverage do you have with the people that are going to pour your foundation, the people that are going to frame that house, the people that are going to do the drywall, the electricians, the plumbers, the roofers? How much leverage do you have with those people? Well, not very many, but if you hire a general contractor that has a relationship with the roofers, the framers, the electricians, the plumbers, they're going to get a much better price and be able to get that work done in a timely manner. Same thing with a consulting forester. You work with a consulting forester, he's going to give you professional advice based on your objectives for your land. And each tract of land is a little different. And every landowner has different objectives for what they want to do on that land and how they want to get that forest started. That consulting forester is going to have a wealth of contacts when it comes to site preparation vendors, tree planters, the people that can do the spraying, or the people that can do the ripping or the bedding, where to get the trees at, where to get the best genetics advice. And when it comes to selling your timber, they're going to have the network of timber buyers to send out the bid to and solicit bids for your timber, getting the very best price.
You're going to get what you pay for, and the cheapest option is not always the best. So, no pun intended here, but don't miss the forest for the trees. You got to be able to see the bigger picture here.
Excellent, David. I like
it. I'm a new dad, so I've been just storing dad jokes. It's what I do.
Well, congratulations.
So we've teased this topic now, I think at least twice in this conversation alone, but let's dive in, and I don't want to spend too much time on it because I think I've heard you say this carbon credits deal can literally I don't know if we'd be able to cover everything in a week-long seminar. We got a couple minutes, so let's keep this pretty high level, but I do want to dive into that. So for those of us who maybe aren't even familiar with carbon credits, what are they, first and foremost?
Okay, well, a quick snapshot of today's carbon offset program. The whole goal of the carbon offset program is to offset the effects of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that's caused by manufacturing, etc. And this is done by first quantifying and monetizing the carbon sequestration process in a forest through a certified process In forestry, this entails encouraging responsible forest management via a long-term contract, often 30 to 40 years. Arkansas is dependent on specific programs, and forest land can range from $30 to $200 per acre in a return on that carbon. And carbon, you look at it, it's another income stream for the private landowner. So it's something that they really should consider. It's just like a hunting lease. Well, you want to be able to get all you can off your land, whether it's timber, whether it's gravel, whether it's hunting leases. And now you've got carbon as another income stream. And in Arkansas, there's an oversupply of timber. We're growing more hardwood and pine than we are harvesting. And it's often referred to as the growth to drain ratio. For pine, there's a 1.6 growth to drain ratio, which means for every tree that we remove, there's 1.6 trees growing. For hardwood, for every tree that we remove, there's 2.5 trees growing. So we've got, as Dr. Pelkey out of the University of Arkansas, Monticello likes to call it, a wall of wood. And that oversupply is being reflected in our stumpage prices, and has for the last 10 years. Our stumpage prices are kind of at the floor. And to provide state and national implications, let's examine the supply and demand and look at it from the supply and demand of timber and how it impacts carbon. So as stated earlier, we have approximately 11 million acres of private non-industrial timberland in Arkansas. If only 25% of that was enrolled in a carbon program and averaged 40 credits per acre, that would yield approximately 109 million carbon credits.
Wow.
One oil company alone, just one company, is predicting that they're going to need 120 million carbon credits every year by 2030. That's just one company. And we can't deliver enough to meet that one company's demand.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's logical to assume that the demand will outpace supply, which in turn is going to cause the carbon credit prices to rise.
Will it also cause the supply to rise though? It seems like those two things might work against each other in a way. If the stumpage prices are hitting the floors because supply is so high, but we still need more, how does that work from a just simple economic standpoint?
Well, look at it from this perspective. If timber prices are at the floor and these carbon programs are asking you to delay harvest for a period of time, that's going to help you. You're going to continue to get that biological growth. It's on the stump. It's continuing to grow biologically.
Yep.
You don't have to harvest it at these low prices, and you can still get an income stream from the carbon. Mm-hmm. And if carbon prices increase, you may get a better price to have your trees standing out there on a stump than it would be for you to go ahead and harvest them at a low price. I mean, in southeast Arkansas, David, I've heard of people paying a logger to take their trees.
Wow.
Because they're pulpwood trees, and there's no market for pulpwood. And in order to keep their stands, which are overstocked, viable and resilient and healthy and vigorous, they got to thin that stand. And they're having to pay a logger 50 cents a ton to remove some of their from the timber. And it's not just southeast Arkansas, it's also over in western Mississippi, across the river. I've also heard that they're having to pay loggers to take their pulpwood. So, yeah, carbon's something that folks really need to take a look at. It's another income stream, and when they're doing that, they need to be educated and very aware of what is available to them in terms of these carbon credit programs. There are several out there. I've been through about 4 of these carbon cycles. They seem to come and they go. But today, I think they're here to stay just because of the multitude of carbon folks that are operating today. And from a standpoint of growing hardwoods that some of these carbon companies are demanding, their demand for hardwoods has increased exponentially over the last 3 years. So I think it's definitely something that people need to look into. And when they're looking into it, when they're looking at getting started, the challenge is understanding all the conditions of that carbon contract that they're signing. And when they're considering to sign that, they should look at several different companies. Carbon companies that you select to enroll from are several. There's several here in the state. One that's operating is Native State, and it's headquartered right here in Conway, Arkansas. There are other companies out there like Forest Carbon Works, Finite Carbon, and others. And I would advise landowners to get involved with several of those and find out, compare one program against another program so that they can find a fit for them personally and their objectives. And you can go online and search for a list of questions that you should ask before enrolling in a carbon program. There are quite a few places that you can go, but some of these sites have 15 to 20 questions that you could ask. So go online, get that list of questions before you contact those carbon companies, and you'll be a lot better informed in order to ask intelligent questions of them with regard to their contract.
Got it. Yeah. I've gotten to know Stuart Allen over at Native State pretty well. He's a great guy. And yeah, there's programs out there that make it very easy, very hands off. I know Jim Woodruff, Scott Sandlin, I think they've kind of enrolled themselves independently, which that seems like a lot more of a hands-on effort. But yeah, well
It is. In Native State, Stuart Allen's program, he's aggregating small landowners. So if you've got 40 acres, 60 acres, 80 acres, he's able to take the small landowner packages, aggregate them, and offer them to a broker and get you some income for your land. So you don't have to be a large land ownership. You don't have to own hundreds of acres or thousands of acres to qualify. If you've got a small ownership, I'd first and foremost get in touch with Native State.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool what they've done, because these don't really work at scale unless you're able to aggregate large acreage together. So there's obviously many more landowners out there with smaller acreage, and highly recommend reach out to Native State. They're great people over there. So well, Greg, before we wrap up, I'd like to give you a chance just to talk a little bit about AFA, Arkansas Forestry Association. I mentioned this at the top. You're our incoming president, which congratulations on that, by the way. I think I can't wait to see, where you take us. But you're the right man for the job, and I'm excited to see what you're going to do. But if you could give us a quick overview of what's AFA's purpose, some of the things that they do to support this industry.
Well, first and foremost, the Arkansas Forestry Association's tagline is Voice of Forestry, with the goal of being the face and voice of forestry in Arkansas, representing the entire forestry community, including government, industry, non-industrial private forest landowners, forest resource professionals, etc. So all disciplines of forestry, not just industry, but industry, government, non-industrial, and all forest resource professionals. So it's a broad association asking people to get involved and engaged. And the association's primary goal is advocacy, serving as an advocate for sustainable use and sound stewardship of Arkansas's forests and the forest resources to benefit the state's forestry community and all Arkansas today and in the future. That's their goal. In addition to advocacy, education is a big aspect of what they do. They offer landowner workshops. They have a strong program there with landowners. And as a newly elected president of the association. I've already met with Max. They have an accomplished team. Max Braswell is the executive vice president of the Association in Government Affairs, and he has the honor of being the longest serving executive vice president of the association, I think 15 years plus. And he is leading that team, and that team includes Anna Sparks, who's the director of the business and the Arkansas Tree Farm program. You've got Rob Beadle, who's the director of forestry education and the Arkansas Forestry Association's Education Foundation. Seth Stevenson is our communications coordinator, and Chris Durham is the administrative assistant. He's got a superb team. They are a good fit. They work well together. My first goal as president is not to mess with success.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yes, I'm not going to mess with success. However, given that they have a proven track record of accomplishments, that's first and foremost. I don't want to interrupt that and mess that up at all. My primary aim is to support the existing programs administered by those professionals. Perhaps I can train to become a certified tree farm inspector. As I understand it, there's a shortage of those. Perhaps I can train to become a certified tree farm inspector. I can certainly support Max in promoting our profile and presence with state and federal legislators by adding to the presence and contact with them, and continue to be available for us as a speaker for educational workshops and tours, etc. So I think it's an excellent association if you're involved in any forestry related activity. It provides you networking opportunities with folks that are also engaged in that aspect of our state.
That's great. Well, we've covered a lot here, Greg, and really appreciate your time. But did you have any parting thoughts for those listening who might be interested in Arkansas land or the forestry industry in general?
Well, first and foremost, I would say join the Arkansas Forestry Association to stay abreast of the issues and opportunities in the forestry community and network with others having the same interests. Get engaged by becoming a member of the committees that you're interested in and that you can contribute and serve in. Arkansas land remains an incredible investment and a tangible asset for your forestry portfolio. Like that country music song says, buy dirt.
Yeah.
Well, I believe that Arkansas land is an underappreciated investment opportunity, and I look forward to working with y'all in the coming future. And I can be reached at my private email, flygreghay@gmail.com.
Fly Greg Hay. That's a nod to his passion for flying there. He's a pilot.
Exactly.
Well, Greg, we're fired up to have you on board. You're going to be an incredible asset, fit in great with our team, and obviously you've got a lot to bring to the table. So we could not be more excited about you coming on board. January can't get here fast enough as far as we're concerned. But again, man, thank you so much for joining us. I know our listeners are going to appreciate all the insights that you've shared. I've learned a ton just in this hour or so that we've been talking. So I know others will too. But yeah, looking forward to seeing all the great things that you're going to bring to our team. And thanks again, man. Couldn't thank you enough.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for the opportunity in advance that you've given me to join your team after the first of the year.
Let's go. Well, everyone, thank you for tuning in to this new edition of In Our Expert Opinion podcast. We will be back in a couple of weeks, and thankful for everyone who tuned in.
Thank you much.
Thank you for listening to In Our Expert Opinion Real Estate podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss any of our upcoming episodes. For more on land and commercial real estate, please connect with us at saundersrealestate.com.